Are car sales set for a rebound here in an SUV-heavy world? Well, the data suggests it's happening at least a little bit, but I don't think we're going back to the good old days. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I'm John, and this is coming from Automotive News. This was an article about a week ago that's kind of stuck with me, certainly while I've been doing my recent videos about Ford and Lincoln and their automotive sales around the world. And the data that Automotive News has uncovered shows something pretty interesting, and that is that in the first quarter here of 2023, cars represented 21.4% of new vehicles sold in the United States. So that's slightly more than 1 out of every 5 vehicles was an actual car. That is up from the last quarter of 2021 when it actually reached its lowest point of 19.6. Now, it's only 2% difference. That's a minor grade up, but it does represent a little bit, I think, of a change, and I personally think we're going to see more of a change in consumers' behaviors, and they actually bring this up in a couple of different ways. It's really pretty fascinating. Now, like many of you, I drive a car, and many of us lament that there's less cars physically on the market, but the market has shifted to SUVs. Just as a personal note, my stepson actually is having to be in the market for a car right now. He's looking at SUVs and trucks because he had a sports car before. He's getting something different. So this is a trend that's going to continue. So I'll say up front, I don't see the 20% market suddenly becoming 50% of the market again. I don't see cars making that kind of comeback, but I do see a shift back towards cars, and I do think this is going to leave some manufacturers behind, specifically Ford, because they only sell the Mustang here. Chevy is getting rid of things, and for affordability, they're bringing back the Trax, not a smaller car. And then, of course, Stellantis over there, they're getting rid of the 300 and really have nothing in that less expensive sedan category except for that Dodge Hornet they're bringing, which is of course an SUV. But this really pulls together a couple of pieces of information that GFK they're a research firm. They took a look, they did a survey at shoppers who bought new vehicles or were planning on buying new vehicles and asked them what did they feel about affordability. This is the first thing we're going to talk about here. That starting at the bottom here, near the bottom, 20% of buyers, non-luxury buyers, 20% are going to have to look at a car with fewer features. 25% look for longer finance and lease terms. 29% postpone the purchase for at least a year. 32% switch to a lower cost vehicle, and 40% cut expenses elsewhere to afford a new vehicle. Now, I bring this up because the reason that manufacturers love SUVs and have shifted so much manufacturing into SUVs is because they have higher profit margins. It doesn't necessarily cost a lot more to make a RAV4 to a Toyota Camry, but they can sell the RAV4 for a higher price and a higher profit margin. And this affordability is squeezing buyers. Right now, we're around $45,000 for an average transaction price, and Toyota is thinking that it's going to reach about $50,000 this year in 2023, and this is squeezing buyers. So what have cars been compared to SUVs? Well, they're less expensive alternatives. And people are shifting back that way. And I think that's the start of what we're seeing here. Certainly, we still have some constraints from the chip shortage, and certainly we have markups at dealers, and the used car prices absolutely shot through the roof. But all of that's starting to normalize a little bit. And I think there's a little bit of a shift that people are shocked that a basic SUV is $35,000, $40,000, $45,000. And this isn't even talking about the prices that they're trying to get for EVs right now. So I think we see a shift back towards cars. And unfortunately, this really hurts the domestic auto manufacturers the most because they largely abandon the section. But there's a second thing they mentioned in this that really caught my eye because I hadn't thought about it. And that is a demographic shift. That generally speaking, generations don't want to own what their parents owned, right? If you think about the huge, large sedans and station wagons, when the minivan came out, people were like, this is a lot more functional and useful. We're going to have minivans. Well, then you had generation or generations of kids in the back of minivans, and it just wasn't cool. So what did they do is they wanted something that looked a little less like a mommy mobile. They moved into SUVs. Well, now you've got a generation of kids that are growing up and coming of age and having jobs. They're squeezed by rent. They're squeezed by the job market, and they don't want what their parents drove. Now, many of them do. That's why we have about 60% of the market is SUVs. But I can see a shift where these generations are going to start easing back over towards cars. And there's some minor data here that also supports this, that if you look at Hyundai, for example, they gave an example here, the Elantra and the Sonata both had increases in sales. The Elantra increased 47%. The Sonata increased 87%. So those manufacturers who stayed in cars, even if they slimmed down their lineups, they are set to capture these people moving back into cars. Now, Automotive News, their data analysts, the way they look at it is they think that we've reached kind of a stasis where you've got 60% SUVs and crossovers, you've got about 20% trucks and about 20% cars, and you'll have variations within a pretty narrow range there. But I disagree a little bit. I think I can see cars coming back, and part of that is the move, the environmental concerns people have, and the move to EVs. Yes, we have all these EVs coming out that are SUV body styles, and yes, people feel good that they're so much more efficient using that electric power, but the fact remains, just like gas power, the car is going to be typically lighter, lower, more aerodynamic, and be more efficient overall. And I think some of the people moving to EVs are eventually going to say it's just better and cheaper to have the car. So I think you've got economic concerns that are going to be pushing people to look more at cars again, and you've got environmental concerns, efficiency concerns of people going to be looking at cars again. I don't see it going back to, 40, 50, 60% of the market. I absolutely don't. I think we've worked through a fundamental change in the market, and this market is across the world. But I do see cars making a little bit of a resurgence, and I question whether it's going to be enough for some manufacturers to enter back into the car market so they have something to offer. Because as I've said several times here, Ford, GM, Stellantis have largely abandoned that market and left it to imports. And I'll close with this one thing. They had an example in here from Volkswagen that when they started offering the Taos SUV, which is about the $25,000 range, they shifted a lot of their production to that, and correspondingly, they had a drop in Jetta sales because the Jetta is built on the same factory. But the dealers are screaming for Jettas. So they do have people who are coming in and going ahead and getting an SUV, but they're losing sales because there's a generation of people who like cars or want to move out in an SUV, and they have to have something to offer. I actually don't buy the belief of some of my viewers that manufacturers are forcing us into SUVs. It's a chicken and the egg question. Are people moving there and therefore you need to offer more, or are they moving there because you're offering more? I actually believe that the manufacturers are trailing consumer demand. But if this is switching back to cars, I think they're trailing consumer demand again. Right now, I do think you've got people who want to move back to a car, who want a car option, and there's nothing there unless they move over to Honda, Toyota, Nissan, places like that. I see a minor resurgence, a minor renaissance in cars, even if manufacturers don't have a full lineup of 4 different sizes or 5 different sizes. I can certainly see a situation where manufacturers enter back into the car space with maybe 2 options, small and middle, kind of what Toyota's doing now with the Corolla and the Camry. I can see that becoming kind of the default. Let me know what you think below, guys. I appreciate you being here.